Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Game Time Discussions podcast. My name is Emory Cuzzy, and I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby. And today we're going to talk about uh, this weekend we had the Combine. We're going to talk about some of the prospect news, some of the things we kind of expect, and kind of just how the landscape has changed since before the weekend had started. We saw the 40-time record broken by Xavier Worthy. We saw some guys dominate at positions, like Braden Fisk on the D line. So yeah, we're just gonna hop into it, kind of get going with. I guess the first thing I want to talk about, because I think it's the most intriguing thing to me out of all the things that we saw this weekend, is the cornerback class. Actually, you look at the top of it, and there's really 4 to 5 guys that are kind of just talked about as like, could any of them could be number one. Maybe this weekend we saw 3 of them. 2 of them couldn't be there between Kool-Aid McKinstry because he has a fracture in his foot, I believe. And Cooper Jean is still coming off of injury, so he wasn't able to be there. But the other 3, Quinion Mitchell, Nate Wiggins, and Terran Arnold, all got to show off their skills. And I think you could still make a case for any of them. It didn't really give you a good feel on which one was the best. So
Right. Yeah, and it looked like Quinion Mitchell athletically had he was the biggest bright spot from that position in the combine with his 40. I believe he led the position with the 4.33.
No, Nate Wiggins led the position, but he did lead the position in the bench press.
Okay,
he had the most bench
so
press.
He showed off his full athletic ability. Nate Wiggins killed it as well, like you mentioned. I had them flip for some reason. But yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag because there's 2 that are kind of falling out just because they weren't the big names in discussion. You had kind of one that was kind of stationary with how he was, and then 2 kind of excelled. But at the end of the day, cornerback position wasn't really the talk of the whole event. It looks like there was other standouts, a bunch of quarterbacks, really, and we're not talking about the 3 or 4 or 5 that were as first round projections, but multiple mid-round quarterbacks killed it, and then receivers just running 40s out the wazoo, and so corner kind of got overlooked a little bit. But yeah, so it'll be very interesting. We also saw some fall. Kalen King struggled.
Yeah.
And then from the safety position, we're just going to couple in the DB since the safety class isn't really too strong. Cameron Kitchens had one of the worst combines. He was probably the biggest loser of any position.
I think he was the biggest loser of the whole combine.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was a struggle for him. So I mean, what was your biggest takeaway, I guess, from the DBs as a whole this weekend?
I think for me, and so of course Nate Wiggins only ran the 140, and then he had a hip flexor injury.
Yes.
So he didn't participate after that. But I think for me, it's more so, I think people were, and I think everybody was right on Quinion Mitchell is the thing. And coming off of his film, it's a little bit harder to tell if he's actually this good. Like being able to see it on film, because he never played press man in film. He was in a lot of off man. Of course, he basically locked down everybody he played, but he's also playing, for Toledo. He's not playing at one of the bigger schools. So watching him in the Senior Bowl and in the Combine and putting it all together, I think he solidified himself as possibly, most likely a top 20 pick, but even possibly a top 15 pick. And I think so. He really stood out to me out of everybody for sure.
Absolutely, and like we said with Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think he's probably done in terms of testing for the entire draft process. It sounded like he wouldn't be ready until training camp. So if that's the case, it's just he might be one that kind of slides a little bit because of I guess we thought the 15 to 32 range. We thought that was going to be run on tackles, and then run on corners. But then all of a sudden, with all these receivers coming out and killing it, sounds like there might flirt with the 4th of the first round might be receivers, and so that's going to push some people down. And I think guys that aren't testing or participating in the entire offseason process might be the biggest detriment to them, at least from their draft position. But that doesn't mean the worst thing or that they can't come out and still kill it. We saw McKinney a couple of years ago, who we thought was best safety clearly by far, fell out of the first round just due to positional need,
Hmm.
and then has become an All-Pro. He's a second-round pick. It's not
Yeah.
the end of the world. But yeah, that's just kind of some of the things that we thought from a draft slot process.
Well, I think though it's been really weird, and I'm going to actually go to the guys that didn't test.
Mhm.
I think it was really odd that, of course, Marvin Harrison didn't test, which is normal because it only can get worse. But he didn't go to his own interview,
Yeah.
and that was really weird to me because I know Malik Neighbors will test at LSU's pro day because him and all the guys they want to test so that they can get more eyes on their teammates, which I think is really cool. Jane Daniels and Malik Neighbors going down there to Baton Rouge and making sure that everybody else gets eyes on all these guys is cool to me. But Marvin Harrison, it's very odd what happened this weekend to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely am right behind him with the not testing,
Hmm.
at least in the 40s and all the drills, because you can only go down when you're at the top. So with all these guys running fast 40s, if you hypothetically were a 4 or 5 receiver, he's not a burner by any means,
Yeah.
but he can run away from you. But if he did hypothetically run in the 4 5s or something like that, that could be a reason why Malik Neighbors jumps in front of him, because he's more of a over the top guy.
Hmm.
Roma Dunze did well, and then obviously you had other guys that just relative athletic score
Right.
were some of the best we've ever seen. Three of them finished in the top 20, I believe, of the last 3,000 receivers that were drafted. And 1 and 2 was not Xavier Worthy, who
Right. Yeah. He only ran
crushed the
fast.
combine.
Everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah. So I understand that, but representing yourself, doing the no agent thing, is we haven't seen it work out well, at least early on. We've seen guys eventually negotiate their
Hmm.
contracts at their deals. Richard Sherman comes to mind in his second, but at the same time, when you're young, it's a little concerning that you're just like, I'm okay to do this on my own,
Right.
because at the end of the day, you're still 21. You don't know what this business can do,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and with the strength of this class, it'll just be interesting to see. I don't anticipate that putting us down, how we view him as a prospect, being our number one overall prospect, number one at the position. But it'll close the gap a little bit. So it'll be very interesting going into the pro day how the rumblings around that would change people's minds in that regard.
I think talent is going to speak for itself in this case, but it's very just odd to me. I mean, in another, another player from this draft class, he's in Caleb Williams, who's a top 5 guy on big boards and going to most likely go number 1 overall.
Mhm.
He doesn't give any of his medicals this week, and he did great though. I really appreciated how real he was during his interviews, things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, he
Um,
he could have worded some things a little
yeah.
better, but at that point you're just nitpicking.
Hmm.
Uh, no one's a perfect prospect, as much as you want to say something one way or the other. Uh, and with how well he's played, like you said, the tape speak for itself. And he may not say things the right way, but I think we've kind of come to the realization that it's more so like a Patrick Mahomes situation where we're annoyed at the family members more so
Yeah.
than we are the player.
Right. Of
Because
course.
Patrick Mahomes is the perfect quarterback that you want, at least from the intangibles perspective. Not even talking about the talent, but just how he presents himself and
Hmm.
throwing wide open touchdowns that are dropped and lose the game. And he's like, I got to throw a better ball. Doesn't even need to say that, but he could word his way around to where it's not his fault, but he takes blame.
Hmm.
Caleb Williams, like, obviously, he's you know very prideful in his abilities, and so when you carry yourself that way, you have to be able to
Perform.
perform
Yeah.
and then receive any kind of pushback that comes your way when it doesn't go that way.
Hmm.
So, all we've heard this talk of, I want part ownership of a team. I feel like all of that is straight up coming from his dad,
Yeah.
and I just hope that it's not like a LeVar Ball situation
Hmm.
where he just kind of overshadows
Right.
how good he is, because Caleb Williams is way more talented than any of the Balls will ever be at their respective sport.
Hmm.
And so I just want him to maximize his abilities. And so I
Yeah.
just don't want family getting in the way of that.
Right. And I think that, like you said, I mean, this quarterback class is a lot deeper, I think, than we thought originally. Um, because of course you've got the top three. You've got, Drake May and Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, all three of those guys who we expect to get their names heard really early. And
Mhm.
then the next tier of guys, the next three, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix Jr. We expect all of those guys to get picked pretty early.
Mhm.
But there's more in day two than we really expected, I think. Um, Joe Milton, and I mean this, it was amazing to see his deep ball
Yeah.
because he snapped the ball and then stood there and waited for the receiver to get down the field. Like it was like he was playing jackpot and like when you're little kids.
Mhm.
And he was throwing it, 70 yards in the air. No problem. Easy.
Right. Yeah,
And
there was no heave or anything of
mm-mm,
it. It was just straight rhythm,
mm-hmm,
and that was just so impressive to see. I mean, I can't remember a throw like from a pro day or the combine that just kind of caught people's eyes more
mm-hmm,
since like Zach Wilson's
yeah,
rolling out to the left and heaving at 60 against his body,
mm-hmm,
and that's kind of one of the very. It may not have been the entire reason, but one of the reasons that he kind of was locked into two before the draft even started. We
yeah,
knew like they and he kind of came out of nowhere coming from BYU, and then Joe Milton, obviously I don't think he'll even come close to being a first round pick, but making himself a day two pick is huge because that probably means that usually in those ranges are teams that are already playoff caliber teams that just need the backup. And
mm-hmm,
so you look at a team like hypothetically Cleveland
mm-hmm,
and their lack of draft assets and Deshaun, who knows if it works out or not, but being able to get behind him for a year and that's kind of those situations that you put yourself in, and that's what helps maximize middle round quarterbacks and going into good situations is those kinds of
I think,
pairings.
yeah, I think I remember one of the others that blew me away was actually high school.
Mhm.
It was Jameis Winston off his knee for 60 yards coming out of high school.
Yep.
And that those are the types of throws they don't go out of your head. Like they're just
Right.
stuck forever. Um, he wasn't the only one that impressed though. One of my favorite guys this week is somebody we aren't even going to talk about as a guy that's probably going to go first 4 rounds. Devin Leary hit every throw. He was probably the most accurate quarterback. You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
accurate quarterback this weekend. And he just peppered everybody. It was awesome to watch. And I was like, okay, so he just came out here loose, knowing he wasn't going to be, one of the guys being watched, and just chunked it. And even Daniel Jeremiah on the stream was like, I have to go back and watch Devin Leary, you
Right.
know? So there's just, opportunities when you go into the combine for any position,
Hmm.
truly.
Yeah, and then also um, his name kind of gets lost in the hat
Mm-hmm.
after this class and how his college career ended compared to when it started. But Spencer Rattler is
Mm-hmm.
another guy that he was a former projected number one overall pick, and he was the starter over Caleb Williams until he got benched in the second half against Texas. Caleb Williams took the reins and just ran with it, and then he obviously had to transfer, not knowing that Caleb Williams was going to follow Lincoln Riley. Went to South Carolina, had some ups and downs. Didn't really have any statistics if you want to look at just the
Mm-hmm.
numbers that just solidify. Oh, he's back, or he took advantage of that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But he threw well, interviewed well, and somebody's gonna want that. I kind of give him the vibe. He gives me the vibes. I never liked his character when he was the top guy. You know, I've seen videos of him and calling out teammates and stuff like that when they're just running drills and
Mm-hmm.
not taking blame, no accountability, those kinds of things. Obviously, those were years ago at this point, and he's been humbled because
Yeah.
of falling from the pedestal that he was on. Um, Everything could have very well changed, but he kind of reminds me of the potential of like a Drew Lock, where right situation, it all goes well in your favor. You can really shine, but it could also just fall flat in your face if you
Right.
know things don't work
Well,
out.
he has all the arm talent. There's
Hmm.
a reason he was projected first overall. He brought along a really good wide receiver in Xavier Leggett. He had a poor O line. I don't remember the stat necessarily, but I know that his O line was bottom in the SEC.
Mhm.
So just bringing you know himself from his situation, becoming the starter at South Carolina, and he played well. He didn't, like you said, blow anybody out of the water, but he actually hadn't done that really in his whole career. We talked about it when he became the starter at Oklahoma. I was a big fan of Mordecai,
Tanner
who
Mordecai.
who then went to SMU and had a good career there. And I thought that he was older, he was going to start over Spencer Rattler, and that just didn't happen. And they kind of just gave the ball to Spencer Rattler, and he was just not ready.
Mhm.
So now maybe he grew up, like you said, he got knocked off the pedestal and had to be humbled, and maybe he grew up a little bit. And now he's ready to make a NFL team a really good backup and possibly help them win games. So
Exactly.
um,
But yeah, with that being said, let's kind of move on to the big topic of discussion. All the receivers.
mhm,
It's got to be a talked about position. This event is perfectly made up for basically pass rushers and receivers to
mhm,
show off their skills, and there were so many that just kind of took the ball and ran with it. Let's just kind of start off um, with both Texas receivers, Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, um, just absolutely killed it. Xavier Worthy broke the combine record for 40-yard dash, which is crazy to me because being a Texas fan, watching a lot of their games, I never knew that he had that kind of speed.
mhm.
I knew he was fast, but you know how Tyreek Hill can just get the ball and you're afraid that he's going to go 80
Yeah,
yards. I
absolutely.
never have really had that fear with Xavier Worthy. He does get a lot of short yardage stuff, but the yak was just never there. He was a very good return man
Mhm,
um, when he was out in space, but it just seemed like he couldn't make the moves to get to the next level on those short bubble routes. Deep ball was fine, and then I've stated before my issue with his hands. Obviously, he's come and played through a broken hand through his poor sophomore year.
mhm.
Junior year, he had some drops, but he did improve on that. So he'll be a very interesting name because of the size in which he is, being only 165 pounds. Very thin, rail guy that has some injury history already, and it'll be very interesting to see how high that 40 takes him because he's going to be a popular name to discuss after that first tier wide receivers.
For me personally, the 40 didn't help his stock at all. Like for me, I think that I knew he was fast.
Mm-hmm.
Watching tape, he's fast. Like we talked about, like when he runs routes, like he is fast. So going into the combine, him running fast wasn't actually what was gonna, really set him apart for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was gonna be, more explosive change of speed things. And we didn't see that because after his 40s, he didn't
He
continue
stopped.
the yeah.
Yeah.
So because he checked the box of I'm in fast. Well, I knew you were fast. Like I didn't know how fast you were. I knew that you were probably a 4.2 guy. You felt like a 4.2 guy on tape because we've only seen a couple of those ever, and that's what you compared to me. John Ross,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is right there with him,
Yeah.
and
Which to not to cut you off, but I don't want to hear the comparisons to John Ross because John Ross really had one productive year
right,
and in a high powered offense, whereas Xavier Worthy was a true freshman starter
yeah,
and he was productive for 3 straight years. So
mhm,
he actually has the production and the consistency. But like you said, we were looking more so for the route running,
yeah,
for what can you do after the catch, all that stuff. And we that question still remains because of the 40
right.
being the only
I think
thing he
I
did.
think with the comparison to John Ross, it's more so that you can see the speed
Mhm.
in like when you're comparing them. It's like, oh well, they're okay, they're both fast, but with Worthy, he has more nuance to his game, obviously, than John Ross ever had, um, and that's a big thing. But I have also always have the question, like his average depth of target was like 11 yards.
Mhm.
He caught 42% of his passes as screens. This is the fastest guy in football, in the college football game, and he's not catching long balls. He's not catching, explosive plays, and that's
Mhm.
something that I wanted to see. probably from him this last couple of years, because his freshman year, he actually did that. By far his best year to me was his freshman year. I don't know if that's quarterback play, which we can have on a different day. Our Quinn Ewers talk will go in circles and we'll just have that conversation. But yeah, I guess I knew he was fast, and I don't think that it changed my stock on him.
Right.
It just checked the box.
And when I said his stock kind of soared, I wasn't referring to our personal ranking of him.
Course.
I'm talking about solidifying as a first round because, like we said, I believe we had 5 first round receivers.
Yes,
in our
first mock, yes.
And so we kind of and they were the tail end. Brian Thomas 28,
Troy Franklin,
and 32. Then Troy Flankman at 32, and we were debating between him and Xavier Worthy with that last spot with Kansas City, which we know is going to target a receiver at some point early in the draft.
Right.
But now with Brian Thomas doing the combine he had the 10th best relative athletic score of all time as a receiver. And then right behind him, A.D. Mitchell, the 11th score. I've heard buzz of them flirting with top 20 picks now.
Yeah.
And so with Xavier Worthy running the 40, people are going to fall in love with that, whether that's warranted or not. And so I think he's solidified himself as a first-round pick. That doesn't mean that we're going to think that he's going to outperform anybody that he's leapfrogging.
Right.
But that's just kind of the trend that I'm seeing based on what I've heard from sources.
Yeah, I think he probably, like you said, I think, and we talked about this the other day, 40 allows you to get drafted higher, and it's not necessarily projective of your actual ability on the field. It's always good to be fast. Don't get me wrong. That's how I feel. I think, if you run fast and you can actually do all the other things you're supposed to, then it's really good. Because then you can always use that speed. But yeah, I think guys like Ladd McConkey, he ran a 4.39, and I really didn't think he was going to run over lower than a 4.5. So it was really impressive to me. And then you had Tez Walker, who was one of the better combine guys after he fell in stock after the Senior Bowl. Troy Franklin actually fell. His stock definitely fell this weekend. Just because he didn't run sub 4.4 like everybody thought, and I think that made his stock fall.
It's just kind of by default. And another one that we really like that's probably going to fall at least out of the first round for the time being, Keon Coleman. He's kind of one of a kind in this class based on the style in which he is. But running a 4.61, that just kind of stands out. And I saw Mel Kiper this morning talking about it, and he was just like, if he didn't run the 40, but he did everything else, he would be right there with A.D. Mitchell and Brian Thomas. But because he ran that 4.6, compared to everybody else doing what they did, that's just going to stick in your mind, and that's what's going to drop him a little bit. But that could be just the best case scenario for a team like Carolina. Doesn't have a first round pick. Obviously needs to build around Bryce Young with the lack of receivers that they have. That would be a perfect fit. Or somebody going there.
Right, of course.
And obviously there's going to be receivers that fall in the second round that, we're going to have like 15 receivers off the board before pick 60.
Yeah.
Something around that range. So, and it's just like, it's crazy. And so basically it's what we're kind of trying to dignify now is, after 3 or 4, who we know is going to be top 20 picks, how do you differentiate between Brian Thomas and Xavier Legette?
Right.
And because some guys that just don't perform the best, they might fall all the way to the end of the second round just by default.
Yeah.
And but sometimes we see a lot of times that position is where you get the best receivers from. Some of the best receivers in our game were second round picks.
Well, I think for me, you said differentiate between those guys. It's basically how you what kind of guy you want. Because if you go Keon Coleman, you really want a contested catch guy he's 6'3", 215. He's physical. He's going to out jump everybody. He's got long arm. He's one of those guys. If you want a speedster, Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, both of them ran, 4.34, 4.21, like we said. Tez Walker, 4.36. Like if you want speedsters, guys that are going to take the top off, you might want to feel that way. Adonai Mitchell actually is contested catch too. And then you have Ladd McConkey, who can play slot. He can play outside. He's a chess piece, and he ran a 4.39. But he's also got he's probably the best route runner, if not the best. I think he's the best personally out of everybody in this draft class, except for maybe Rome Odunze, out of the
Mhm.
whole draft class. So yeah, it's a flavor, like what kind of flavor you want. And it's really exciting because then, Kansas City, we expect to want a guy that's a speedster, Tyreek Hill-esque. So Xavier Worthy made sense to us in our head. But he's probably not, the sixth best receiver. He's much lower on the board for us. So it's one of those things. Like, we can always, of course, think that we have a better receiver in one guy, but but the team wants what they want.
Mhm.
Especially guys like Kansas City, like we've talked about CEH going over Jonathan Taylor. We did not condone that in any way,
No.
but we didn't get to decide. We're not sitting in their war room getting to decide that. So um, I think there's a lot of pass catchers in this class that are going to be really good, and it'll be all about where they go and what opportunities they get. So it's going to be really exciting to me.
Got you. Yeah, and that being said, let's kind of move over or down rather to the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I guess, I'm intrigued by your thoughts on I guess the top of the class because obviously Joe Alt is our consensus number one.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's solidified that over the weekend. But I think there's a bit of jockeying for the 2, 3, and then trickle down from there. Not too many fully drop their stock. We'll talk about one in a moment, but just kind of give me your thoughts of the weekend and how that position
Mm-hmm.
or position group
Yeah.
will pan out.
Well, there's a couple guys that I think dropped their stock. Actually, we're gonna have a video over risers and fallers,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about a couple of them. But the big one um, was Olu Fashanu, who came in with 9-inch hands, the smallest of any offensive tackle ever recorded at the combine. And I don't really know. I'm going to be honest because I don't know. Um, if that actually is going to really affect if he's going to be a good or a bad player.
Mhm.
Um, in the past, of course, we really talk about short arms more than anything. Well, that's not what he didn't have that problem. He had the long arms. It's just he had the hand size of me, and
Mhm.
he's a massive person to have something hand size my size. So, yeah, I don't really know how it's going to change it, but I do believe because the fact that we have Joel ahead, like we said, but at 2 and 3, Fashanu and Fuaga, both of those guys are really close to me. And if teams see this hand size and this difficulty as a real problem, they will most likely move Fuaga ahead of Fashanu. He's a true right tackle, Fuaga is. So it also might be I need a right tackle over a left tackle. That's why we're going to take, if it's really like, say they're, the same for one team, it'll be need based. If it's the Giants, they're going to go right tackle. You know, if the Chargers weren't going to go Joe Alt, it would be right tackle because they have Rashawn Slater on the left. Those types of things. So it'll also be a little bit of that. But I think, I think right now, if I had to take a choice, I think Fuaga definitely, because he was one of the best at the combine for his on-field drills. I think he might have moved past Olu. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean that's probably the biggest range to look at that is the Jets is
Mm-hmm.
probably going to get the second tackle off the board. It's pretty easy to just pencil in either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Pick your poison. But they have needs at both tackle positions, and it's not even close anywhere else
Mm-hmm.
where they need to be targeting. So um, we saw that there was kind of a going to be a run on tackles in the teens to 20s. Maybe a few fall out based on the rise of some positions. But did anybody in that range kind of rise above any of the others?
I think Amari's Mims probably solidified himself to me as the number 4 on our board because he
Yeah.
was already there, but this combine really was like, okay, yeah, he's the guy. He ran I'm sorry, 507, I believe, in
Mm.
the 40, which at 6'8", 340 pounds, that's flying. And he's just a really good athlete. Like You see it in his foot drills, his foot speed drills, and things like that. So I think he definitely solidified himself. JC Latham did not test, and I think that actually probably hurt him. Out of all the guys that didn't test, he got hurt the most because everybody else around him did so well. Um, all of the, Troy Fatanu, Jordan Morgan, Tyler Guyton, Amari Smims, all those guys had pretty solid combines. So all of their stock to me probably slid up. Even knowing they're going to slide out of the first round, they did enough like to slide their stock up just in general of like the positional value.
which will,
And JC might have hurt himself.
which will be very interesting. I believe JC was one of the notable names of our first mock that we left out of the first round. And we're opening mocks today. Obviously, we're not going to do a mock post combine,
Right.
just because we're right about to be in free agency. So it's kind of pointless to try to pencil in guys right now. But reacting, rising up and down, that's what we're going to be doing this week. But JC Latham was somebody that we left out. He was odd man out. And we saw some mocks today, updated ones, that had him going 6.
Yeah.
And so it's very strange. I think we're much lower on him than other analysts. It'll be very interesting to see what he can do, to see if we can meet in the middle with others that I guess get paid to do this.
Yeah, of course.
But that was just kind of something that stuck out to me. I wanted to get your thoughts on. And then I guess one last thing before we get out of here, let's kind of jumble up the front 7. Some guys that kind of stood out, some guys that kind of fell. I know a couple of Florida State guys for you did pretty well for themselves.
Well, yeah. So on the offense, let's do. We'll move out a little bit, and we'll start with tight ends because
go to tight first.
Yeah, we'll start. Our front. Yeah, we'll start on offense first, right? Because that's what's really everybody likes to hear about, I guess. But at tight end, right behind Brock Bowers, it's a little bit more murky than we expected. Jatavian Sanders ran a 4.69, which was behind just about everybody that could have moved stock and got to him. Theo Johnson looked great at the combine. He is a massive human being, and he can do some really athletic things. 6'6", 280, great jumps, ran a 4.57 40, just did some really cool things. And then you've got Ben Sinnott. I'm sorry. I believe it's Sinnott. Yeah. And he looked great at the combine. So it's like it's getting really tight between 2 and 4. Because I think Jatavian was kind of considered the number 2 for sure. And right now, you could almost say, well, we could pass on Jatavian in the second round and wait till the 5th round to get Jarrett Wiley, who's going to be a receiving tight end that's taller, good size, and he runs faster, and he could be the better guy. So I think the teams are going to have to really think about who they're going to, if they want to take a tight end, there's some guys that can actually block, and there's something. Jatavian Sanders lost a lot in this combine. So I think that's a big one. I don't know, what is your take on how the tight end class looks after all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those positions where really, unless you're that elite prospect that's going to be, fringe first rounder, early second rounder, like we've seen. Obviously, we have one that's even exponentially better than that this year. But typically, the late first to early second is where the best tight ends go, and then there's a big drop off to the middle rounds. End of third, early fourth is where we've seen kind of the bulk of our successful tight ends come out. So with Jatavion Sanders, all the Texas guys, it seemed like, killed it at the combine, and he was kind of the one that kind of didn't really help himself. Like you said, he was our consensus number 2, but we didn't have him even close to being a first rounder, just kind of middle of the second, late second. But now it's kind of when you're talking about taking your pick in terms of receivers, there's different styles of tight ends, and there's going to be ones a lot later that will be available that could be just as productive, if not more. And he's not the guy that's probably going to stay where he's at. He's going to drop a little bit. So he'll have to have a big pro day to re-separate the gap a little bit. But that's just kind of my take on it in a nutshell. Just because there's a lot of solid tight ends once again.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the bigger surprises, I would say. um, from this weekend.
All right, so yeah, like Cam said earlier, let's jump over to the D line though,
Mhm.
because um, I got man, man, wow, Braden Fisk. I have heard people putting him in the first round. I don't think anybody had him as a top 10 D lineman, you know, and now he's a possible 31st, 32nd pick. I'm like, whoa, whoa,
Yeah, let's slow down a
that's
little
all. Yeah,
bit.
he did great though. He ran the fastest 40, won all, but had the best jumps. He did everything. So we got to see his full ability of athleticism. But we still watch tape, guys.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
there's a reason we watch tape. Yes, he has an incredible motor that shows on tape, but he still lacks some things that we see on tape that he needs to work on, that he's not able to show in these things.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I love it.
And on top of that, like he's kind of more of a finished product compared to some of the other guys that we are kind of unknowns
Mhm.
after Dallas Turner and Leatu Letu. He's 24, so you're not really going to improve much from where it is. So if you watch more of Florida State than most people, if he didn't really jump out and he just kind of was just a guy, that's kind of what you're going to get. And if his testing numbers were so well that he might get overdrafted, that might be kind of a little bit cause to pause once we kind of review some of the teams and early
Right.
picks that they take.
Well, I think, of course, watching the games, watching the film, yeah, he showed up in big games, right? So that's something that you can never overlook. Um, the Louisville game, he was possibly the best defense player we had. Jared Verse doesn't get that second sack. There's a much tight. I think Braden Fisk is by far unanimous defense player of the game, but at the same time, he's not that great of a pass rusher. He's not that great he doesn't do everything great. He gets stuck to blocks. Like, he did really good at the Senior Bowl. He does really good at the combine. His draft stock shoots up. He's probably a third rounder,
Mm-hmm.
but he might go
Early
early
second,
second. And that's great. I'm happy for him. He made a lot of money.
right?
I'm great. That's awesome. But at the same time, we're gonna overproject him if we do that stuff by following the combine around and just telling everybody that it's the best thing ever. And when they come out of the combine, if you get the athletic scores that you're supposed to, you're just going to be a great football player. That's not necessarily what that means.
Right. Yeah, and we said in our first mock that there's kind of a three-horse race at edge, and they're three very different types of
Yeah.
edges. Dallas Turner, Leatu Letu, Jared Verse, um, all of them solid,
Mm-hmm.
very solid combines. Did any kind of really jump off the board to make themselves the edge rusher one? Obviously, another one, if we're going to group together the whole defensive line, Byron Murphy, I think jumped into the conversation of that range in the
Mm-hmm.
draft because he kind of separated himself from Jerzon Newton in my eyes. So, talk to me about that, I guess, range, because that we're going to start seeing them fly off the board pretty quickly after all these quarterbacks and receivers are figured out.
Well, so I guess let's start with the Jerzon versus Byron conversation. I see them as 1A, 1B still, and I
Mm-hmm.
really wish Jerzon would have tested, because that would have just kind of, when you see team players like 1A, 1B, you need something to separate them. And I
Right.
was really hoping this weekend was going to be that. And, sometimes not testing at all is almost better than testing. We talk about it with Cameron Kitchens. If he wouldn't have tested, we probably still would have had him as like a top 4 safety. And he's falling because he ran a 4.65. So Jerzon made it really difficult going into this week. And I want to see if he does the pro day at Illinois and stuff. But yeah, it's really close. And I think Byron Murphy did a great job. He looked great in the figure eight drill. He sinks his hips really well. He's a good pass rusher. And so I think he definitely has the conversation. And I just wish based on film, if I had to say based on film, I probably would still take Jerzon myself. Just because I think he's been more dominant for longer. He was a 2-year dominant player, while Byron kind of came into his own this year. And Byron wasn't necessarily the most dominant player in the world because he had so many other good players around him.
Yeah, he wasn't even the best defensive lineman on his team.
Right, exactly. So I guess it's just really close, and that one's a really hard one for me. Just like the edge side of it, I think it's also really hard because everybody does something different and they're all good.
Mhm.
Latu was slow. He was absolutely slow. But then you go watch the field work and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy has the best hands. He still moves. It's like his lateral movement is almost as fast as his like vertical movement. I'm like, I don't understand him. But and then 4.46, I believe, for Dallas Turner. Blazing. But he's a stand-up guy.
Mhm.
And so I think personally, if I had to pick 1, 2, 3, like if I had to go down the order, I think Dallas Turner, because he was kind of sitting at 3, I think he's definitely moved up. Where you'll have to watch our positional videos because I really want to. Yeah, I want a little bit of time to sit on it and make sure I get the right guy. Watch the film some more, and then Jared Verse is, I think Jared Verse did well, but all of them kind of just stayed the same. Like they all checked boxes. Jared Verse was fast. Jared Verse was awesome in the bench press. I don't know if you saw, he
Mhm.
killed it in the bench press, which we kind of expect. He puts offensive linemen into their quarterbacks. Like that's normal for him. He just, here you go, sit down. So yeah, I think it's really close. I think that Dallas Turner moved up. I think Latu has to move back because he doesn't have the 10-yard split speed that you want to see when a guy comes off the ball. And that's actually more important than the 40 when you talk about
Right.
DNs. When you talk about edges, offensive linemen, the split speed is the most important part. And I wanted to see more because he is so good at just getting guys off of him and, his quick movements. But he didn't have that like A to B type of thing that I wanted to see. So, yeah, I'm going to marinate on it and think about who really does. I mean, the problem is they all deserve to be number one, but someone has to be put number one in our rankings. If they all have the same career, we're all going to look back at it and be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But I wouldn't be surprised if we had a big board and it was 14, 15, 16. That wouldn't surprise me at all if I just had them 1, 2, 3 back to back to back because they're so close. They really are.
Gotcha. Yeah. So so that about wraps up our first take combine video. Before we get out of here, one question I do have, quick take. What is somebody that we haven't really been talking about much in these mocks and these positional videos so far that really stood out to you this weekend?
So the guy that really stood out to me on the defensive side of the ball was Miles Harden. He's out of South Dakota,
Okay.
little school guy. Didn't test out of the world, but he is so smooth in his back pedal. He is so smooth when he's just making changes of direction, doing things. Watching his field work, I was like, whoa, like who's that guy? And that was, normally you do that. You do that a little bit. You're like, whoa, that guy like kind of caught my eye. He was definitely one of those guys that I was like, I think I watched your film, but I don't really remember. Like being able to like shift your weight so well and come in and out of breaks. That also comes with, going and doing these drills. Like you practice what you're going to see at the combine. And he could move. It was pretty impressive. It was very impressive. The other guy, Tip Ryman out of Illinois. Illinois doesn't really throw the ball to their tight ends. And he wasn't productive in college. But he came in at 6'5", 271 pounds.
Woo.
Yep. Ran a 4.6 and then did 28 reps in the bench press. And I'm like, okay, all right. I can get behind this.
Right.
So he's one of those guys, I need to go back and watch some more film on and see like, why didn't I notice this before? And I'm sure it's going to be, he doesn't catch the ball. And, it's, you watch double teams, of course, you watch single blocks, but like really you don't get enough of that, like, good footwork and steps and stuff until you like really dive in. And so that's what I'll be doing. But yeah, he was really impressive in the combine. He is a guy that we probably haven't even talked about. Sure, Devin Culp, he ran a fast 40, but there's a lot of things that, you know, he didn't do well on film. Tip Ryman is a blank slate to me. I know he blocks well. I know he can block, um, and he'll be helpful in that way. But I also think, you know, if we can figure out how to get
Just
this guy the ball in space, he might be able to help us
yeah,
out more.
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of an unknown. I mean, looking at last year, one that kind of rose out of nowhere that didn't have the production in college because he was in the back seat, but Darnell Washington
Mm-hmm.
going to Pittsburgh, you know, being a second round pick, be behind Brock Bowers, you don't really think about him, but you know, he tested out the wazoo,
Mm-hmm.
was moving the sled like it was nothing. That was one of the things that stuck out in my brain from last combine,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, but it's just a big gamble just because of um, it's an unknown. And
Yeah.
so with him, he has less stock because of the school he went to, and because also not being as productive as
Right.
you would want a tight end to be to go relatively early. But we'll just kind of see what happens. We'll have to do a little bit more research on
Yeah.
that.
The idea of moving the sled, I remember that actually coming out of one of the, like, and I'm talking about Tip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that came out of the analyst's mouth. I don't even remember who it was, but he just, like, it was like with ease. He just,
Yeah,
there goes, see you later. And I
right.
mean, yeah, so it's one of those things, you know, you just find a guy that has the physical tools. Um, and if you can get him in a later round with those tools, sometimes you can mold him into something even more special on the receiving game, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that he didn't do as well. But yeah, so we really appreciate it. This is our, like Cam said, our combine review, our first one ever, but we're going to be doing more. Hopefully, we'll be doing this for a really long time, and at least that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
But please go, yeah, like the video, comment, subscribe, tell us, you know, that last question: who were the guys that stood out to y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that, you know, you can't watch everybody. There are, you know,
Too many prospects
200
every year.
prospects every year in the combine. Um, and then thousands of prospects come out of college every year. So yeah, tell us who y'all like, who we should go see. Who should we go scout, and what teams do you want them to go to? But yeah, we really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate y'all being here.
Yeah, like Emory said, go in the description. Check out our recent outlooks for all of the divisions that we did. We just wrapped that series up last week, so please, you know, check out those. I know they're kind of long, but you know, skip through where you can and just kind of give us some hit points. We're still looking for some likes and comments from those videos as well. A little bit of an outlook what we got going forward. We're not going to do a 2.0 yet. We think it kind of pointless just because free agency starting next week. So after the first wave or two, maybe a week or two into it, the end of March is probably when we'll come out with our second mock draft. But for the time being, we got several positional videos to do because we have yet to do our top fives, top tens at the respective positions. We got to do a risers and fallers video
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to come out with later this week. And then, you know, we're going to get right into free agency. That's kind of what we got in store for y'all. Do what you can, interact with us. Let's build this community like we intend to. I'm excited to see what you guys have to bring to the table with us.
All right. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it. Y'all have a
Yep.
good one.
Take care.